All right, welcome. Today, we're not just looking at some common skin condition. No, we're going to be analyzing a full-blown strategic conflict, a silent invasion that's fought on the very borders of the human body. So get ready to think like a military strategist, because we're about to decode the tactics of dermatophytes.
Okay, so to really wrap our heads around dermatophytosis, we need a powerful analogy. Let's think of the human body as a country. And these fungi, the dermatophytes, well, they're highly specialized border invaders. Their entire campaign is fought on the outer walls, and they never, ever venture deep into the heartland.
So first things first, let's get a lay of the land. We need to survey the battlefield. In our analogy, the country's outer walls are those keratin-rich layers of our skin, hair, and nails. Now, keratin is supposed to be a protective barrier, right? But for these particular invaders, that barrier, that's the sole objective.
And what's really fascinating is just how specialized these invaders are. You can think of them as border squatters. They're not interested in the country itself, just the material the walls are made of. They feed only on keratin, and they live strictly in those dead outer layers. The visible damage we see, the redness and scaling, that's not them burrowing deeper. That's actually the country's own defense system reacting to their presence.
So how do these squatters even get past the perimeter in the first place? Well, they use these stealthy little units called arthroconidia. Think of them as sleeper agents. They can hang out for ages in the environment, on things like hairbrushes, towels, even in the soil, just waiting for contact to activate and start their infiltration.
And this brings us to a really crucial strategic question. Once they're in, why don't they just keep going? Why don't they push further and invade the country's interior? What keeps them stuck on the outer walls?
The answer lies in the country's incredible internal security system. You've got antifungal factors in the blood serum, the physical barrier of the living epidermis, and of course, the host's own immune defenses. All of these act like a powerful containment force. The invaders simply can't penetrate any deeper. So what do? They expand outwards, along the border. And this perfectly explains why we see that classic ring-shaped lesion. It's literally the front line of the battle expanding in a circle.
Now, you should know that these invaders don't just have one playbook. Oh no. Depending on which faction we're dealing with, they use totally different strategies to colonize the country's walls, especially those structures we call hair.
We basically see two main combat strategies. The first is called endotrix, which you can think of as an inside job. Here, the fungus gets inside the hair shaft and just weakens it from within until it snaps right at the surface of the skin, leaving behind what looks like a tiny black dot. The second strategy is ectotrix, more of an external assault. In this case, the fungus forms a sheath around the outside of the hair, causing it to break off a little bit above the skin, leaving these noticeable short stubs.
And then there's a third strategy, one that's way more persistent. It's called favus. This isn't so much a direct attack as it is a long-term occupation. The invaders create these dense, thick, honeycomb-like crusts, we call them scutula, right around the hair follicles. And here's the key difference. The hair itself doesn't actually break. It's just a chronic, deeply dug-in occupation. Now, our intelligence agencies have categorized these invaders into three main factions, and each one has its preferred targets. First, you have trichophyton. It's the generalist. It'll attack skin, hair, and nails. Then there's microsporum, which focuses on skin and hair, but it leaves the nails alone. And finally, you've got epidermophyton, which goes for skin and nails, but not the hair. So just knowing where the attack is happening gives us our first big clue about which enemy faction we're up against.
Okay, so the country doesn't just sit back and let this happen. It mounts a pretty fierce defense. In fact, most of what we actually see and call ringworm, the redness, the itching, the scaling, that's all just the visible evidence of the battle raging between the host's immune system and the fungus.
And this brings us to an absolutely critical point. Sometimes the country's defense system, it overreacts. It sends out a widespread alert signal, basically an allergic reaction to the fungus that shows up on skin far, far away from the actual invasion site. This is called the dermatophytid, or ID reaction. It is so important to recognize this as friendly fire and immune alert and not a new enemy invasion. You don't treat the ID reaction itself, you just treat the primary conflict zone.
So, if we want to launch an effective counterattack, we can't just go in firing blindly. Our forensic labs have to run some diagnostics to get a positive ID on the enemy and confirm its presence.
And this protocol is really systematic. We start with some field recon, a quick KOH mount to see if any fungal elements are there. We can even boost this with a calcifluor white stain, which is kind of like using night vision to make the fungus glow. But to get the full enemy dossier, we need a culture. That's what lets us identify the exact species, and that intelligence is what guides our targeted counteroffensive.
So, with solid intel in hand, we can finally move to evict the invaders. And the goal here isn't just to win the current battle, but to fortify the borders so this doesn't happen again.
Our strategy is always tailored to the scale of the invasion. If it's just a small, localized skirmish on the skin, topical forces, like antifungal creams, are usually enough. But for a deeper infiltration of the hair and nails, we have to deploy the systemic forces, the oral antifungal medications. And this is so important. The campaign has to continue even after the border looks clear. We have to make sure every last one of those sleeper agents is completely eradicated.
All right, let's wrap this all up with a final debrief. These are the high-yield intelligence points, the stuff you absolutely need to remember for your exams.
Let's lock these in. 1. The invaders only want keratin. They don't go into living tissue. 2. The ring is the immune battle, not a burrowing worm. 3. Endothrix is the inside job that leaves those black dots. 4. The reaction is just an allergy, not a new attack. And finally, always complete the mission. Treat beyond the clinical cure. When you think of it as a border war, all these points just naturally fall into place.
And that's our strategic analysis of the border war against Dermatophytes. This leaves us with a really critical question for the future. If the visible disease is mostly our own body's reaction, what new kinds of treatments could we develop that maybe modulate our defenses instead of just attacking the invader? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.